I read this wonderful description of work, and it basically said that one of the reasons we're so depressed in the modern world is you have just this dichotomy of work for sustenance and, lack of work, leisure, laziness. And the thing is, this all comes down, a lot of it, from the Judeo-Christian tradition, this valuation of work. And, work for sustenance, working to live, is the worst kind of work. It's not fulfilling. It's soul destroying. And by having work, by needing to work in order to live, that also feeds into then just wanting to veg out in front of a TV during the off hours. Whereas for the ancients, sure, they need to pick berries or whatever. There was work in order to live, but they never really had moments of pure leisure because they would always keep busy with something, but work for achievement, work for something. So, when work is done in the name of art or in the name of craft or achieving something for oneself, that actually is immensely fulfilling.
Another 2% to the bottom line. Isn't that something to work for, putting another 2% on the bottom line?
I wasn't referring to that. I was referring to, maybe, a shoemaker making an impeccable pair of shoes, a carver making an image of Christ that is perfect by his or her eyes, even though the public wouldn't notice it. That's what I was referring to.
Of course.
Yeah, that's the reward of excellence.
That's right, and it's kind of independent of medium.
Yes.
Right, and I would also say that can still be manifested. It's not something that only the carvers or sculptors did at that time, and so the modern workers cannot. I think the joy of working is when you have the right intention to do something, whether that's sitting behind a computer and working on a project or cleaning or dry cleaning, whatever it is. But I think the intention is what makes all the difference. And often we find ourselves in a situation where, like Advaita said, we take it out on the television or family because of something that happened at work. But one has to ask, what's the intention behind a number of hours I'm putting into something? And I think the intention really makes the difference between just working and working wonderfully.
But I have the sense, the feeling that more so-called primitive people lived in cultures that divided up time differently. There was life, which included work, and it was more social. Everyone was doing things and often together. And the other category of time might be sacred time, ritual, dancing and singing. But I think it was just such a given that this is the way people live in their particular environment. And the only thing to contrast it with is sacred time, whether that's a vision quest or a community event.
Eric Gill, I think, put it best. He said, in the modern age, we work in order to live, and in the ancient days, we lived in order to work. Now, we do the things we want to do in our leisure time and have to fill the rest of the times with things we don't like very much. Whereas in the old days, we'd fill our working hours with the things we liked to do, and in the off hours, we'd do the things we had to do.
Yeah, and I think there wasn't such a distinction between a worker and a craftsman back then.
No.
Now, it might not have been called craft in the case of someone who's farming land or whatever, but it can still be done as a craft. You can do it well. You can try to improve your techniques. So, I don't know. Modern work is, for most people, something to do, pay the mortgage and get some food and stuff like that, and buy a bigger TV. So, yeah, not quite so healthy a civilization, though.
The thing that irks me, I'm not going to criticize our system too much. We already have been there and done that. But one thing that particularly irks me is, how in this digital age, we have consumerism jacked up to a whole new level. That you have the whole thing of like subliminal advertisements and influencers and all this kind of stuff that basically the whole point of all of this is to get people to buy things they don't need. If someone has a kitchen knife and it's working out for them, why do they need a newer and better one? And if theirs is dull, why don't they sharpen it? This whole era of getting rid of things, let's just say the modern world is all good and hunky-dory and everything, but there is a disease festering within the world right now. And I think, this cult of having to dispose of things and having to buy more and more and more things you don't need is just a sickness.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I reflect on that kind of thing. And what comes to mind is when everything is measured in terms of money, money becomes the measure of all things.
Yes. Is that your phrase?
I don't know.
Pretty good.
I don't know. It came into my head once, and I don't know if I heard it somewhere else and filed it away in the recesses or where it came from. But yes, I think it is good.
I could swear I heard it before, but it's possible that I heard it before from you, so I'm not sure.
I'm not sure I've said that in this forum before, but I can't say for sure I didn't. But you may have read someone or heard someone who said the same thing, maybe a little bit differently, but still the same message. Or maybe you heard somebody else say the same thing. I don't know where it came from. I don't know where anything comes from.
It's also very interesting how certain periods of time have this zeitgeist. It's something we tend not to think about now in the era of instant communication and the internet. But you have, peoples in Northern Europe, Southern Europe, the Mediterranean, Egypt, China, not communicating with one another whatsoever, and yet saying almost the exact same things at the exact same time. And it's sort of marvelous.
Yeah, it's like a certain idea enters the manifestation we live in, and everybody multiple people tune into it, even if they're not consciously turning the dial. Yeah, I mean, you can certainly see that in the technological revolution, if you might call it that. And you can see it with other things too. I mean, different kinds of technology appearing in multiple places pretty much at the same time.
Right. That has happened a lot, hasn't it?
It has, and it still does. Except I think some of these ideas that may appear are not so benign. Some of them.
Well, someone just asked me a question. Maybe I'll just throw it out here. How closely related are, when you're speaking about use of one's time, how closely related are quantity and quality of time? I'm reminded of someone in the Trika who once observed, quantity has a quality of its own.
Well, I think there is an interplay between them, because high quality time can seem to move faster or slower, but quantitative time just sort of plods along.
Well, I actually just this morning read this passage that's sort of relevant here. The individual was saying people tend to divide time into past and future, but there is no future. The future doesn't exist yet. There's only past and present, and the past has already been. So essentially, there is no quantity of time. There is only quality of time. And based on that, you could have someone that's 90 years old that dies young by only having truly lived 2 minutes in their life. They didn't experience reality during their life. Whereas on the other hand, you could have someone who was a great mystic or thinker or whatnot, a poet who experienced things here and now for 23 years of their life and died an old soul at, let's say, the age of 23. I thought that was beautifully put and might be relevant to this.
Right. I mean, only the quality of the now matters, because even the past is just something that comes into mind in the present.
Yeah, you can't verify the past.
No, whatever we call remembering does happen, whatever it is.
Right, but it happens now.
It happens now. So there's really no past or future.
There's only now.
There's only now, which I guess is only a pure quality rather than a quantity. Because it's not a segment.
Very good. That really follows, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah, it's not a segment, in a timeline.
Right.
which
Right.
memories always seem to
Right.
be.
That's very good. That's very good. It is pure quality, isn't it?
Yeah. The present moment can be delicious. Truth is, it's always delicious, but we're distracted sometimes.
Yes. I think this is good stuff.
Good stuff happens.
Over the weekend, a friend asked me to read a article he wrote for a journal, and I got back to him with some thoughts and criticisms, and he said, well, pretty much I agree with everything you've said. Through the writing of this, I've realized that I was wrong on a lot of what I wrote. Do you think I should withdraw it from publication? And I said, no, why should you do that? You know, you said yourself that you learned from this. Life is flux. If you got something out of it, great. Let it be, because the next time you write something, that's going to be something that's put out there, and eventually you're going to grow from that.
And not only that, the very story of that transformation is interesting and may be helpful to others.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, additionally, if in the process of writing it, one uncovers certain errors and misconceptions, then perhaps reading it might do that for somebody. They might notice the tension between one thing and another, and that the author now calls an error, and, question it rather than buy it. I mean, when I read things, depending on the kind of reading, but I frequently am reading along and say, wait a minute, I don't know about this. And, I'll pause and consider it, and it falls into a yes, no, maybe category. And then I move on with whatever I've concluded about it. There's always something to learn.
Indeed. So were you able to persuade him, Seda?
Yes.
Good.
I mean, it wouldn't be bad if he retracted it. It's up to him. But, it was a sincere effort at putting something out. So, I mean, there's nothing to be ashamed of. But if it's too wrong, it might really mislead a lot of people, then you might want to withdraw it. But if it just fell short, later on somebody will write about that author and want to see the transformation by reading all of his works.
Exactly. And in this case, it wasn't someone putting things forth dogmatically, but you could see a certain process in their thinking. And these kinds of writings are valuable. And for anyone who's on a path, they're going to look back and notice all sorts of problems with things that they wrote in the past. But if they tried to wipe them out of existence, well, they wouldn't have anything out there. And I've seen in many cases where there are some great poets or writers who have done this, that they've tried to consign certain things to the fire and someone saves them. And I thank them for that, because it's sometimes maybe it's not the greatest thing, but it's helpful.
Well, and the knowledge that it was supposed to be consumed in a fire gives it a whole different quality when you read it. So that's nice.
There's also, that's one possibility. Other possibility, some people who feel like they never need to revise things, feel like they have always been right.
Oh,
and
well,
that's
yeah.
dangerous.
Yeah, that's a different thing.
Yes, that's a different thing.
I can't be wrong, therefore I can't write anything wrong kind of thing.
Right.
Problem starts with the I.
Yes, indeed. You're really on it tonight. I particularly like that now is purely qualitative because there's no extension.
Yeah.
That's very nice. Thank you.
It doesn't have any of the usual quantities we think of, like space and time. I mean, space and duration, or, space and time, whatever. Well, interestingly enough, the fact that Einstein, I assume he was the first one to use it, I don't know, referred to space-time as a thing, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, go on.
Well, it indicates that you can't separate one from the other, and so they must be made of the same stuff.
Okay, yes. Isn't that the point of space-time? It's that stuff?
Well, yes, but it's a new item that condenses the two together, and it needs both of them to describe itself. Anyway, space-time, nice.
Well, it's interesting that the world of physics has come to this space-time thing.
Yes. Well, yes. Obviously, Einstein concluded that they were not independent. And, we ought to be able to accept that, of course, they're not independent. There are no independent arisings.
Right. We know that.
Yeah, we should anyway.
Are you following the current problems in physics with the information problem about black holes?
I just know about Hawking radiation, and I don't understand how that could be true, but apparently it is.
Well, much of the current difficulty has to do with the fact that if things fall into a black hole, they cease to exist.
Is the information lost?
The information ceases to
Yes,
exist.
yes.
And physics says that's not possible.
Yeah, I mean, it used to say other things were impossible.
Yeah.
But it makes sense to me that whatever gives it a meaning, even if it's transformed in some way, would still have a meaning that has something to do with its immediate precedence.
Yes, but the issue seems to be physics insists that these transformations can go in both directions, and black holes only have one direction.
What can go in two directions?
All reactions. I mean, if you knew the state of if you throw something into a black hole and you know all the physics of its state and what happens to it, theoretically, you could reverse all of those transformations and get it back.
If you had all of the traces of it with their vectors.
Yes, that's generally the description of physicalism. But in black holes, that information gets so scrambled or dispersed that one cannot say this reaction could be conceived to go the other direction. I could do a better job of this, but that's...
Yeah, but we don't actually know what happens in a black hole.
No, that's certainly...
So, whatever enters the black hole is in some indeterminate situation. And we may just have to say that whatever information is in there, we don't know what it is.
Right, and then because of this Hawking radiation, eventually the black hole disappears.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. And in fact, that may be a way in which the information transforms the black hole as much as the black hole transforming the information.
Well, one would think that would be possible. But if the black hole ceases to exist, all of the information...
I think we're thinking about this too scientifically and exoterically, and I have a passage here from Klages that I think is very apt.
Who's this guy?
Ludwig Klages of Cosmogonic Eros. When someone shatters the form of personhood in ecstasy, the world of facts also perishes at that same moment, and there arises the world of images for him, with an irresistible force of reality that replaces everything. The visionary soul is in its internal pull, and the reality beheld such a way is its external pull. The former is now associated with the latter, but it never succumbs to being one with it. From out of the polar touching of internal and external is born relentlessly the self-ensouled image. The external begets, the internal receives, and from out of the embrace of both breaks forth the singing fiery torrent of images from the all, the dancing star of chaos arranged into the cosmos. The visionary line from Novalis, the external is an internal state, elevated to a mystery. This expresses with easy grace the meaning of ecstasy and the foundation for all intuiting certainty. And he goes on to mention how the stars, were considered souls or gods. And, the black hole, it's basically that polarity there between the external and the internal. And essentially, on a cosmic level, it's embodying the principle that, this thing that enters it doesn't die. Like, we think we die and then we attain immortality. For the most ancient peoples, there was no death. There was only transformation. One attained eternal life, here and now and forever, and was disembodied, but didn't die, didn't attain immortality. And I would say the same thing. Whatever enters the black hole is disembodied, but still has an esoteric reality to it.
Yeah, I suppose that could be called esoteric, but it's esoteric knowledge only the black hole has.
Only God has, not...
Well, yeah. I mean, yes, if the black hole is conscious, and as you say, it's been natural throughout most of history to assign life, to think that things in the heavens are living things. But sure, ultimately, it's God.
And another thing that, there's something very much cosmically Dionysian about a black hole, where it can take giant forms of matter and rip it apart and put it back together again through the massive forces of gravity. It's very cosmogonic. It's world shattering and world forming. And I think there's nothing wrong with looking at these things scientifically, but I think there's a spiritual significance to all of these things as well.
Of course.
And I think most of the ancients, certainly the Indians, certainly the Greeks, they would have been fascinated by all of this, but they would have said, okay, you know, you're right on a certain level, scientist, but you need to dig deeper. Too often, though, the religions we have today are like scared by what science brings up. There's nothing to be scared about because there's always a deeper spiritual significance to everything. Science has never been the enemy. It's the engineers and what we do with the science that's the enemy.
Right.
The pursuit of knowledge is inherently noble anyway. But you know, my thing about black holes is if there are black holes, surely there must be white holes.
You would think.
And I've seen references to cosmologist astronomers, you know, peering as far back in time. And they talk as if the place they're looking at is the place where stars are born. So, I mean, that's like a new creation. The place where new stars are formed out of what? Hydrogen.
It's also interesting to note that, you know, every time we look up into the sky without thinking about it, essentially we're performing ancestor worship because many of the stars we see are no longer there. The light is from dead stars.
Yeah, I don't know how big a proportion of the, you know, what we can see has that quality, but, you know, by the time we see certain stars, they may be gone. That's for sure. The lifetime of it is, you know, 3 billion years, and it was born 3.1 billion years ago.
Right. All true. Still with us, Seda Zainab? Or are you now sleeping?
No, I'm still here. I'm enjoying the endless conversation between science and religion.
Yes. Well, science, you know, intends to be all about reality, and so does religion.
Yes, I don't personally find them to contradict one another, but I agree that most worldviews or even religious views do.
Yes, that's right. That's the way I see it.
Say that again. Most what views?
Well, I said I personally don't find any contradiction between science and religion, but I know most worldviews out there, including some religious worldviews, do find a problem with science.
Well,
they're inherently limited, so they're going to exclude some things.
Well, I mean, there's truth on both sides of that argument, you know.
Which is why it's endless. This is one of the mysteries that we have to live with.
Well, I would say that there's nothing in science that contradicts religion and nothing in religion that contradicts science if you look at it the right way.
There we go.
I think the issue is, you know, there are ways of viewing things with the mind and ways of viewing things with the soul. And unfortunately, despite protestations to the contrary, both science and religion tend to be viewing things with the mind. And, you know, all of the, you know, a lot of what we have as, you know, reactionary religion today is still viewing things with the mind, not with the And if you view things esoterically, mythologically, cosmologically, then, and again, anything we can put into words is already only a stepping stone to the soul view of things, because once you get the true intuitive sense of things, it's no longer expressible. But it's still that stepping stone. And right now we still tend to look at things too rationally. And I actually find it hilarious how some of the most ardent, you know, Bible thumping religious people, or Quran thumping religious people for that matter, are so stuck in rationalism without even realizing it.
Yes, well, how does one get someone out of rationalism?
Narcotics?
There's a thought, yes. I mean, I always want to ask the question, where does rationalism get its authority?
Rationalism is just a description of what the mind does in many ways. But, you know, I think there are two ways of knowing. One is mental, which is to say facts, thoughts are facts, there they are, and truth. And I don't know if the mind perceives truth. I think it has hints about trueness that I don't know about truth. That would, the truth would be perceived by, like, the eye of the heart or something.
Can we have that formulation again?
Which one?
The last one?
Eye of the heart?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what knows truth. The, so to speak, organ of perception of truth, even though it's, of course, not an organ. And, it strikes me that when you have a really profound or meaningful experience, the facts become less important and the truth becomes more important.
Okay, good.
And I tend to read scripture that way. It is a fact that the scripture says this. If in fact it describes something that really happened, then maybe it's a fact that it happened. But there's a meaning independent.
Yes, right.
Yeah, of whether it happened or not.
Right. I don't know if it happened or not, but you can see that it's true.
That's right. That's exactly right.
I have something, if you don't mind, another thing from Claugus that I think you'd really like.
Well, I like him so far already.
So he starts off with a quote from Rumi. Death may end the trials of life, though life trembles in the face of death. And so the heart trembles in the face of love, as if threatened with its own demise. Where love awakens, there dies the I, the darksome despot. And he who knows the power of love's roundelay lives in God, for he knows how love kills. There's no doubt. Ecstasis is not the disembodiment of or removing the body from the soul, but the unselfing and thus the removal of the mind. However, if it does behave thus, then every ecstasis covers two phases: the phase in which the I perishes and the phase in which life is resurrected. The former is the preparatory part, and the latter is the fulfilling part, the telet of secret rites, the incommunicable nature of which is correctly explained by Aristotle, according to a report by Synesius, with the comment that it is not through mathane, i.e. learning, but through pathane, sufferance, that the eligible person receives the mystery. The way to life is through the death of the I, and thus for every spiritual being, life is only attainable at the cost of death. If we keep this in mind, then we will understand why tragedy arose from the mysteries. For that reason, the man of this world ultimately, I'll skip here. Meanwhile, the wise man, as Goethe famously says, longs for a death by fire, because he knows that only by killing the I will the gates be opened to him. Unselfing is, however, experienced in two ways, and hence preparatory observances change both with time and with the individual persons, depending on whether the I tears itself apart or dissolves in ecstasy. Alongside ecstasis through internal shattering, we find ecstasis through internal melting. When the former begets the Median rage and wine to drown your sorrows, the latter is confirmed by the fact that all gods of intoxication, Dionysus, Bacchus, and Eros, are awarded the epithet of liberating, limb loosening. And just as this shattering reminds us of physical death, so melting reminds us of limb loosening slumber. If consequently sleep and death are able to liberate the soul from its most dreadful adversary, the I, then we understand why the soul of all things can participate in the ancient propensity of mankind for narcotics and psychedelics. There has perhaps never been a genuine ecstatic who was not also occasionally a partaker of psychedelic drugs, and it is no coincidence that orgiastic customs have been associated with the festival of grape harvesting until the most recent of times. After all, is not the daemon of Bacchic rites also god of wine, and does not Bacchus still chime with Venus, even today? No one has declared this more radiantly than that other great poet, the immortal Hafiz, whose brilliant songs and sayings have become a part of German literature. Love how it shatters me, wine gathers up my strength. To be neither strong nor brave is my wish. I rejoice in my weakness.
That's a really a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, it really is.
And, I came across Plagas actually. He's one of these unknown but wonderful figures. He's basically completely forgotten today, but someone I respect basically hinted at him, and it turns out that there's a German publishing house that published a couple of translations from him in like a very small print run. And then of course I can read the German from him, and it's that kind of zeitgeist where at the exact same time, but in two separate countries, him and Lawrence were trying to do a lot of the same things. Basically, in a certain sense, disembody a lot of the crusted up religion of that day and to reinvigorate them with anthropological evidence from ancient religions, along with poetry and whatnot. And I think that this is important. I think, aside from going back in order to go forward, I think also religions need to take poets seriously. Who talks about, Wallace Stevens or Goethe or Walt Whitman as great mystics? But they were. And I think that is the key there. That's the key. All of this philosophy is to open our doors of perception. But once we walk through the door, it's the poets that are our guide. The poets and their poems are our book of Ani, the Egyptian book of the dead. That's our book of the dead for our times. That's my thought on the matter.
I like that, but you knew I would.
Yeah. Thing about, something needing to die so that it can be reborn, referring to religion, it's kind of like when the form becomes a shell, the shell has to get broken. And I wonder if there isn't some connection with the symbolism of, eggs hatching and the world egg and the cosmic egg.
And, it is remarkable. I mean, how lately I've been getting really deep into Orphic cosmology, and it's making me reread some of the theoretical physics, because it's remarkable how much the ancient Vedic or Orphic cosmology actually fits in with theoretical physics. The only issue is that, of course, the Orphics and Vedantists maybe missed out on some of the more material findings, and the physicists are missing out on spiritual significance. But there's none of this tension that you have with exoteric Judeo-Christian faith, where you have a father figure creating the world ex nihilo. And what do the Orphics say? They say the world egg was formed out of the primordial chaos.
Yeah, all right. So it was the first form.
Right. And then from the egg was hatched Phanes, Eros, Dionysus. That was essentially three gods in one, a hermaphroditic.
Three in one, huh?
Yes, a hermaphroditic god that gave birth through itself to the other gods, and from the primordial gods, Gaia and, earth, water, fire, Zeus, and then, Chronos, time. And from these came, the gods that we're more familiar with, and from them, the people. But it's very interesting, and it fits in well with Vedantin and Neoplatonic metaphysics of emanation from the one.
Well, it's very pleasing and satisfying.
But one thing I want to say is that none of this is necessary. There's a lot. One thing all of the ancient mysteries have in common is they say it brings ruin to lift the veil of Isis if you're not ready. And what is hiding behind the veil of Isis? It's truth with a capital T. Truth with a capital T can be liberating, but it can also be destructive if one isn't prepared and ready for it. The simple point is one just needs to live. One needs to live and understand that life is a miracle. And if they're ready for metaphysical truths, great. And if they're not, that's fine too. It's not for everybody.
Right. It's kind of like fire, which ideally should cast light. But if you don't know its purpose, you may get burned.
Right.
I mean, or light. Light illumines, but also blinds.
Oh, yeah. True.
True.
Yeah, that's good.
Light amplifier is a good example.
Black holes? Are they
Oh,
an example?
let's not go there now. But back to this conversation I'm having with somebody else about quality and quantity. The question comes, what about quality of texts? For example, is comedic banter, does that get the same quality points as philosophical pondering?
Well, it depends who is doing the qualifying and what's the criteria.
You're entirely right.
And if it was a comedian doing the qualifying for the comic banter, then he would probably say that's more qualitative than, anything philosophical.
Well, I would say in many ways it depends on the receiver, because a good joke can be more liberating than a complex argument.
Yes, indeed.
Sheikh al-Bashir, I was going to say the exact same thing. If someone achieves an enlightenment state through tragedy, through Sophocles' Antigone or something great, if they achieve it through Plotinus, great. If they achieve it through comedy, through Aristophanes' The Frogs, or hell, if they achieve it through watching an episode of The Simpsons, it's really dependent on the receiver.
Of course, yeah, well said. Well said. Hadn't thought about The Simpsons. You're exactly right.
Well, The Simpsons have been a vehicle for truth and wisdom by just exposing our foibles and things like that. There's a lot of stuff that is illustrated in some of those episodes that are hard to describe otherwise.